Yo, what's up, everybody? I've got my now Beaver homie, right? Well, I guess we both got a little orange and black in our blood at this point. Matt Lisle on, assistant softball coach over there at Oregon State. Man, I appreciate you jumping on and just chatting with me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Cool, man. Yeah, as I said, or as everybody knows, is like the one way we like to kick off the show is give me a wild story, man. Give me something crazy, funny, wild that's happening as an athlete, as a coach. Yeah, what you got?
So the first thing that came to mind for me was in 2018, I was coaching softball at University of South Carolina. We were really underrated, predicted to finish at the bottom of the SEC. We had an incredible year, went like 49-7. We finished like seventh in the country, and we get to regionals. And a little backstory: our starting first baseman in the middle of the year, beginning of the year, her dad was killed in a car accident.
Hmm.
And it was just a really rough year for her, obviously, and just like an emotional time. He was a young guy, man. He was my age, and it was just a really tough thing that happened that season and everybody. And so we're playing in the regionals at home. We're down to our last out. Our season's over. We're down 5-4. Nobody on base, two outs. I mean, it's the kind of in my mind. I'm sitting on the bucket and I'm thinking, okay, hey, here's the speech I'm going to give. Great season. We did, incredible. We defied all the odds. Kind of you're working through the speech, the end of your speech in your head. And so the next batter gets a walk. I think the next batter gets a base hit. And we're kind of okay. And so Kristen comes up, and I said
Yeah.
she has one home run all year, not a power hitter. And I kid you not, I kind of looked up at this guy. I'm like, hey Buck, if you got any magic in there,
Yeah.
like we need you here. Next pitch, 2-run walk off home run
Oh,
to
damn.
win us the regionals. And I mean, it was like I said, I mean, like Disney movie, incredible thing. I to this day, I've been coaching 23 years. I've never experienced anything like it. It was just like, season's over. And it's not like you're doubting it's over. It's just like, hey, this is the likely outcome.
Right,
And
right.
and she walks up, hits a 2-run walk off home run. It's one of the best pitchers in the country. I mean, it's like we're all crying. I mean, it's not like we're not even just celebrating. It's just like,
Yeah.
she lost her dad a few months ago. She hits this walk off home run to send us. I mean, it's just the entire, like I said. I mean, I feel like a movie could be written about that 5 minutes of my career right there. And so, I mean, when you said crazy story or memorable story, that was kind of the first thing that popped in my head.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love it. So that leads me into kind of the first question. Curiosity is like I know that you've kind of built a name for yourself, obviously, kind of in the private industry, but obviously, in multiple sounds like now like college programs and coaching. How long have you been doing each, and like how did all that get started? I guess a little backstory of like how this whole thing like evolved.
Yeah, I'll try to figure out the Reader's Digest version. When I was, 21, 22 years old, I was trying to play college baseball, playing Division II baseball, and I was having shoulder problems. I wasn't, I knew that wasn't going to be a career, and I had a very young child at the time, and I was just like, hey, what am I going to do with my life? And I just knew like professional baseball wasn't going to be the route, and so my old high school baseball coach called me and said, "Hey, would you like to be my assistant baseball coach this year? I know you're out for the year with the shoulder." I'm like, "Yeah, sure. It sounds like fun." And my grandfather coached college football for like 38 years, junior college and different levels. And so like coaching was in my blood. My dad raised me as a coach. He was a coach as well, coaching me little league and all that good stuff. And so I'm like, "Hey, that sounds fun. Like I love coaching and that idea." And so halfway through the year, he got fired after like 35 years as the head coach, and and so that's a whole different story. But now I'm the head coach. I'm like 23 years old, head varsity baseball coach. And I'm like, all right. And, I had such a fun year. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I could be a PE teacher and a high school baseball coach. Like that could be the job that I do for my life. And I'm like, maybe that's the answer. And like, it felt good. And I talked to my grandpa and, he was kind of finishing up his coaching career at the time. He's like, hey, I've never worked a day in my life. That's kind of what he would always say. He just loved his job. So I'm like, okay, cool. Like maybe this could be something I do. So I worked on that, like working on school and trying to finish, and okay, I'll do this. And I did teach elementary school. I taught high school, coached high school for a little bit, and I got a call to be an assistant coach for an NAIA school in Oakland called Patton University, and he's like, "Hey, would you like to be?" I'm like, "Okay, hey, I can take a little step up." And so
Yeah.
I still taught, and it paid $3,000 to be a college coach. So I'm like, okay, and I think I was making $1,900 as a high school coach, so the
Yeah.
stipend. So I'm like, okay, just step up. I did that, and I really enjoyed it. And then I kind of continued to get some jobs, and I got a D3 head job that paid like $20,000. So I'm like, okay, this is maybe I could someday do this. And I really didn't think like, hey, college coaching, maybe that could be something. But like, I had no connections, I had no
Yeah.
relationships. And so I started building a little bit of social media stuff. I had a little newsletter called like Coach Lyle's Savvy, news. I don't remember what it was, like a newsletter I would send out to email to coaches
Yeah.
and people, very small, kind of started building it up. And then I was coaching high school baseball. Our season ended unexpectedly early. And I had a couple weeks off, and I had my now 12-year-old son in 2012. He was a little baby. My wife was working. So I was kind of stay-at-home dad for about a month. And in that month, it was the women's softball, the regionals, super regionals, the World Series. That time frame was happening,
Mm.
and so I sat, I was sitting on the couch, babysitting my kid in the porta crib, and I watched like every single televised softball game you could imagine. I was like, oh my gosh, I love softball. Like I've never really paid attention to it, but the tempo of it, the speed of it, I was like, okay, this is kind of my style of coaching. Like my style of baseball coaching was very like high tempo, speed type of game, and I enjoyed it. So I was like, hey, this is kind of a fun game. So again, I was trying to like break into college coaching at the time, and I bought like an email list of every D1 baseball coach and D1 softball coach, like 600 plus people. And I went to bed one night at the end of the College World Series, and sent an email out like, "Hey, this is my history. I've had some success as a high school coach. I've had
Right.
a little bit. I've coached in college. Would anybody take me on as just? And I'm willing to start from the bottom."
Please. Yeah.
So I got a couple emails from D1 baseball coaches like, hey, maybe a volunteer thing, maybe, it's not like 5 emails. I probably got 40 or 50 emails from softball coaches, like high level, Michigan State, these different places like, hey, yeah, like we're looking for a volunteer assistant, but our volunteers make 30 or $40,000 a year. Like, and at the
Oh,
time,
wow. Yeah.
2012, I was like, okay, like, we could, make it work in a low income play, a place that didn't cost that much. And so started having that conversation, and like I said, it kind of snowballed from there. And I started my softball career at the University of Oregon. We won the Pac-12 that year. I started building the social media thing, and next thing you know, I had 100,000 followers on social media, and it just kind of just snowballed for me, and just kept building. And because of social media and being able to like build this large following. It just opened all these doors in pro
Right.
baseball, working with pro players. And at the time, back in 2012, 13, 14, Twitter and, sharing tips on Facebook and video, like the way that social media is done now, it wasn't done back then. And so,
Right.
not that I was some innovative genius. I just got lucky that like I had this idea that I'm going to do this thing, and nobody else was doing it. There's no other hitting gurus on social media. Like
Right.
that industry didn't exist. So it allowed me to really build up this, large following very quickly. And then, so I was just a pioneer is not the best word, but I was one of the first people to do it, and it just allowed me to do it. And like I said, because of that, it opened a lot of doors for me. And so I just kind of have worked in different positions, and I coached at the University of South Carolina, worked with Chicago White Sox, and kind of bounced around a little bit. And for me, I've got 5 kids, and married, and anybody who's in this industry at all knows that like family and kids is in direct conflict with coaching every day of your
Yeah. Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to find what's the right fit for you, what's the right location. We've lived in different states, and so where I am now, I'm really happy. I really like my boss, and so we're kind of in that. Hey, let's do the best we can right here, and see what happens.
How did fatherhood, I think back because I have like a best friend who had a child like early on, and like at the time it's like, oh damn, like what are we gonna do? And then it's like obviously like hindsight's like, dude, that's like the best thing that ever happened to you. So I'm curious of like how that, when you're 22, 23, it sounds like, and you had a youngin', and like how did that mold you, inspire you, pull you? Like was it a like yeah, now I look across the house like, yeah, I definitely could get my ass off the couch and like get in gear. I'm just kind of curious of like
Yeah,
early on how
so
that shaped.
I had so my senior year of high school, and I was a good baseball player. I did football, baseball, basketball, and track. And I was recruited in baseball and not a ton of love, but I had a really incredible junior year of football. And in the 90s, the way recruiting was so different back in the 90s. And so, I got invited to this like top, it was called the Nike 500. It was like the top 500 players in Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, California, like the West Coast. I got invited to this like combine. I had an incredible junior year of football. So I got recruited and I had two offers, Navy and Fresno State. And my grandfather played football at Fresno State. My family's from Fresno. So it was a done deal for me. I'm going to Fresno State
Right.
my senior year, and then I was thinking, then I was waiting to see my senior year of baseball. Like, hey, what would happen? What if that happened? And during that season is when I had my daughter. So I had a kid my senior year of high school. I went to a private Christian school, so that didn't go over well. And so for me,
The
um,
outcast.
yeah, and so for me, at 19, I had a kid. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to Fresno. I'm like, and back then, and I think now too, like, I grew up in a very, traditional conservative home in the sense of like, hey, you have a kid, now you go to work and you get a job and you take care of your responsibilities. Like, college football or like that's even getting a college degree, that's like you're dreaming. Just now you
Right,
got to get a
right, right.
job. So that like, for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to put that on the shelf, and then I got a responsibility. I came from a family that's very blue collar. My dad worked in an oil refinery. My mom was a stay at home mom, and I'm the oldest of seven kids. So we had nothing. We had no money. So I've got my daughter. I'm trying to. I'm moving out. I get into an apartment with a couple of buddies, and it's like looking back at that time, what I learned the most from it was like, man, I had nothing. Like, in order
Yeah.
to like provide for my daughter, provide for myself, like I had to work. No, nothing was given to me, and so I just look back at that time. Like it made me very resourceful. It made me work very hard. It created this, culture in me, or like this relentless work ethic of like, hey, you're one, $10 away from being homeless like every day. So, it felt like that time of my life, and I was 19 going on 16. I was immature and young, and for a long time, that was tough for me. But at the same time, I think just all those things really taught me, how to survive and when things are tough, how to deal with adversity and things like that, because I literally had no help whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. Did you always imagine, you said you got five kids. Like, did you always imagine that's a large family to
I always
me?
imagined I'd have one, like one. Like I was like, and to growing up, the oldest of seven,
Yeah.
and we said we didn't have a lot of money. I remember it was funny is my brother, my 29-year-old brother, who's 16 years younger than me. We're super tight. Him and I do these dad joke things together, and had a lot of success with that. But I remember when my mom told me she was pregnant with him, and I was 16. I was angry. I was like, we already don't have enough. Can't
Yeah.
afford to buy new shoes, and now we're gonna have another kid. And so I think back, like for me growing up, I was like, man, this is. I don't want to have the life that I had, where it was just like I shared a room with my brother till I was a senior year in high school.
Right.
And so, like to me as a person, like I'm only gonna have one kid. I'm not gonna do that. And so, but looking, now at my age and with my kids and with my siblings, it's like, man, I wouldn't have it any other way. I'd have three or four more kids if I could handle it, because
Yeah.
it's just it's the best part of my life and the best thing, getting today after, I got a long day. We got practice today, but my 6-year-old has a basketball game tonight. Super excited about being able to go to his basketball game tonight. And so, stuff like that, playing catch in the hallways, and different things that you do with your kids, there's nothing better. So to me, I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah. Do you get to, outside of like playing catch with them, do you get to like coach other sports like basketball with them and pretend like you're a
I've always wanted to.
Phil Jackson guru out
Yeah,
there?
yeah. I have helped a little bit with like t-ball teams and things like that. The problem is like if I'm coaching like Division 1 or professional, like it's like 80 hours a week during the season,
Yeah.
which is like their season as well. So there's not a lot of off season for me. And so like if I can show up to practice, I'll always try to chime in and help out. And I'd love to coach basketball one time, or soccer, just a different sport, but
Yeah, yeah,
I just
yeah.
haven't had the opportunity or the ability to yet.
Yeah, I love it. It makes me think of like the Will Ferrell movie, Kicking and Screaming. Like I see you out
Yeah.
there just ah.
It was
Um,
just funny because I'm actually the exact opposite with my kids and with youth sports. I think it's because maybe like the mental, whatever the energy it takes to be a college coach, that when I go to my kids, sporting events, it's like I'm the exact opposite.
yeah.
It's like a release of like, okay, whoo, there's nothing on the line here. Like, your job's not on the line or these things. And so you just sit back and enjoy it. And it's like zero stress.
We don't have to pay our mortgage with the 6-year-old soccer team.
Yeah. So just like, let's sit back and I just sit down in my chair and just enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love it. I'm curious, one of the things, obviously, like early on, like coaching baseball and obviously now softball, I'm sure you've gotten this question a lot, and it's something, people ask me, and I'll tell you what my response is, but I'm curious of your response of just from 30,000 foot view, the difference in not from a technical standpoint, but like the difference in coaching female athletes to male athletes. And I'll like give you my analogy, but I'm curious of like what your input is on that.
Yeah, it is wildly different in a lot of ways. The best way that I could explain it, or the in my experience of it, is that like I am wired the way, my dad is as well. I am wired for sarcasm.
Yeah,
I am wired for like I am not always going to give you it very straight. My tone is not going to be good, and so you learn in marriage and in life. Like my wife always, gets mad at me for my tone, and my sarcasm, these things. And so what I've learned is that, coaching males, not that it's better that you, but they give you a longer leeway in a sense of those things. I think, as males, I think are more designed to be sarcasm, a little, or at least, trained to be tougher or whatever that whatever that even looks like. But in with coaching women, what I have learned is that my landings have to be softer. and
mm,
and for me, what it's done for me is like it's made me a better person. I've learned, like, just my marriage, my life, my kids, that my style that my dad passed on to me, like my style of sarcasm and, like, just getting straight to the critique without any soft landing, like it doesn't work for most people.
right.
And so what coaching women has done is that it's taught me to be better at delivery, how I communicate, and things like that, and just be more empathetic and, like,
Yeah,
more caring about, to me, it's like, why are we talking about this thing, that how does it affect it? And I've realized, though, that it's all connected. And so, the biggest thing I think is just that I think it coaching women has taught me that I've just got to be better at communicating, better at delivery and tone, and less on the sarcasm, more empathy. And I think it's just made me a better person, a better coach, better husband, better dad. And so, uh, the best way for me to look at, like, the differences between men and women is just is it has how it has shaped me. And I think, like I said, I think the biggest difference is, as athletes, is just like sometimes I feel like, you know the difference between men and women is that, on a male team that I've coached, if there is beef between two players, they duke it out, and the next day they high five each other, and like it's over. And like I said, in my experience with coaching women and being married and having daughters, it's like, they can hold a grudge for like months and months,
for
and
years.
yeah, for things. So like men are from Mars, women from Venus. That's one of the differences that I have experienced, is that, like, sometimes they will hold on to stuff a little bit longer, to each other. And like I said, men can, duke it out, cuss each other out for the half hour, and then the next day they're best friends again. And I have not seen that same thing in females and coaching them as that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I always think back to, well, couple examples is I think of it from like a like inspiration, like drive standpoint. Like my go-to is people like, oh, so like what's the difference in you working with like a male team or a female team? I'm like, okay, for a female team, I'm always like, how many classes have you ever skipped in college? And they're like, skip a class. Like I what? Like I've never skipped a class. And then like to the male athletes, it's like, when's the last time you've gone to class, sir? And so
Yeah,
I think
so
there's like more of like an internal drive. They're like there's like
yeah,
a perfectionism aspect of it, right? And so to a
yes,
fault sometimes of like the wear and tear on confidence and value in the way they see themselves.
for
But
sure.
like, I think they do strive, and I think that they're, at least in my experience so far, is like genuinely a little more curious of like
Absolutely.
wanting to grow, and like just that hunger of like help me get better, help me, what's the old like meme, like help me look in the mirror and not see the kitty cat, see the lion, right? Like of
Yeah.
like how great that they actually are.
Yeah, and
um
I would say the biggest thing for me from a coaching standpoint, like in teaching and coaching aspect, is that in my 11 years of coaching women, the one thing that they do much better than the males I've coached with is just a posture of learning. Like you said, they're more curious, they're more willing to try something new. I still work with a lot of major league players and different, and I've been fortunate that because of having success, the buy-in is a lot easier now than it was 5 6 7 years ago. I look back to like Mitch Haniger is a player I've worked with for a long time, and had some all-star years, and him and I have spent a lot of time together. But I remember the first time him and I met, he's like, I disagree with this, I disagree with this, I don't, and then 6 months later he's like, maybe you were right. And like
Maybe.
and then like 7 years later, we've been working together for 7 years. But like in my coaching with females, I feel like 99% of the time, if I come to them, hey, I want you to try this, or like, what do you think about this? Or I want you to, I'm going to change your swing a little bit, this and that. Always it's like, yeah, okay, great, awesome, let's try it. And like I said, males, it just seems like you have to sell and convince a little bit longer and harder. And in my experience, women have had more of a posture of learning and curiosity. And I try to tell my male athletes is like, why I've had a lot of success in softball is because those athletes have been willing to do that. And so like their growth has been much faster, much bigger because they are able and more open to changing things versus like, having to sell you on it, or, keep doing it until you finally say, okay, you're right, I'm wrong. And, I think that females that I've had experience with do a much better job.
Yeah, it's like I feel like with female athletes is like once you make yourself vulnerable and get the trust, it's like it's game on from there. Versus like you said, the male, there's more of a steps of like breaking down their own ego to get them to have the buy-in, like per se is. So yeah. I'm wondering, curious about this too. Um, from a like marriage standpoint, what's the balance of, and I don't mean from like a like coming home and like coaching baseball per se, but like the balance of, I know for me personally is like not coming home and like coaching my wife of like, well, you should think about this, and like this is how we grow, and this is how we do all this. And she's like, Ryan, I'm not one of your athletes. Like, I don't give a shit. Like, just shut up. Stop talking to me like that. Right. Like, so I'm curious for you, especially having 5 kids, being married, like, do you find yourself like going down that rabbit hole at times? And is there like a pause button from the wife of like, time out? No, that was over there. We're here now.
Yeah, so I mean, now that you're getting to the core of my marital issues,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's fine. I mean, I that's another learning lesson of my life in the last 10 years is like, my wife comes to me with an issue, and like my first thing is like, okay, you need to do this, this, and this, or here's the solution, and like let me coach you up on like what to do here. And yeah, I mean, it's my go-to. I'm terrible at it. I just go right into that mode. But I've done a lot better job of saying, okay, you know what? I'm just going to listen. Like, I'm just
Yeah.
like, what do you need? And I think I try to do the same with my players now, better job too, of like just listening more and saying, okay, maybe they just, they want to be heard, or they want you to listen more. And like, maybe it's something else going on. And so for me, yeah, I'm terrible at it. And like I said, I get in trouble at home all the time of like trying to coach up the problem, instead of just like listening and figure, hey, what do you need right now? And trying to go that path differently. So I feel like I have gotten better at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, in life in general, like my kids, everyone, I want to coach up everybody anytime they have a problem and have the solution. And it's tough not to.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I feel like that's the same, like from my end too, especially like with with the athletes is do a better job instead of like telling them the answer is asking the question and kind of helping them discover it on their own. Has been more effective, I guess. Well, it's just
Yes.
the ownership side of it, right? Like
Yeah.
once you determine the answer, there's a certain level of like, oh, this is mine now. Um, so yeah. Why like why hitting? How did that become versus any of the other aspects
Well,
of
my first 4 to 5 years, I was a pitching coach. I loved pitching. Uh, my first college job, I was the pitching coach. I really got into it. I wanted to learn a lot. One of the things that after my first year of coaching high school baseball, I realized I knew nothing about coaching. I had this epiphany of like, I grew up, I know this game, like I know baseball, but like I knew like the details like of pitching or hitting or like anything. Like I couldn't teach any of these things. Like I just did them. And like, I was, and so I went into a deep dive of like, I'm going to learn everything I can about pitching. So at the time online, Ron Wolforth and a guy named Paul Reddick, they sold these, programs and pitching stuff. I'm like, so it was available to me. I bought all the DVDs, all the workbooks, the books. I was that coach who just bought everything. I went to Barnes and Noble and I would buy every pitching
yeah.
book in the sports section. And so that was me. And so I learned everything I could about pitching and I loved it. And then I want to say 2007 ish. I went to lunch with this guy named Craig Wallenbrock. It was kind of a chance meeting lunch thing, and um, he was talking about hitting. He was a hitting guru. He worked with a lot of major leaguers. I didn't know him from anybody, and we went to lunch for about an hour and a half. And then he took me. We went to this. I still remember. We went to this park, and he was showing me these hitting drills and his hitting philosophy. My mind was so blown. Like it was like, oh my gosh, like this is the guru of all gurus. Like this is
Yeah.
incredible. This was unbelievable stuff. And I just kind of fell in love with like the idea of like, wow, like there's this level of, and I had DVDs on hitting from college coaches. Like that, this was like elementary compared to what this guy's knowledge was. And for the next like 5 years, he kind of brought me under his wing. His other prodigy was this guy named Robert Van Scoyoc, who's the hitting coach for the Los Angeles Dodgers now.
Oh,
And I
wow. Yeah.
mean, what he poured into me, teaching me, it was just incredible. The stuff that I learned, and I was like, okay, hitting is like that's my passion. It just got to my heart, and so for me, I spent every waking hour, every minute I had. I didn't watch TV or like have any hobbies. I dove into like hitting and learning hitting, teaching it, how to teach it better. And it just kind of became a thing. And then as time went on, like I said earlier, is that there were a couple guys, a guy named Mike Epstein and this other guy who sold DVDs of hitting online. And it was $50 or, they bought the DVDs.
Yeah.
But around 2011, 2012, I started thinking there's nobody selling like online courses, like an online thing. And at the time there was some online, like you could buy videos and watch online of like coaching clinics. And I would do that. I
Mm-hmm.
would pay this thing called Coach Tube. It was like $50 and you could watch videos of clinics. And I was like, hey, no one's doing this. And those guys were older guys. They were in their 50s and 60s. And I was like, okay. And I was kind of looking around the landscape and I'm like, there's no one sharing hitting knowledge stuff online on social media. And so I decided, and I did it for free for like over a year. I said, I'm going to give away everything I learned on Facebook and Twitter
Yeah.
and just share everything I learned about hitting. And I just gave it all away. And like, nothing that was, and because of that, like I said, I built this huge following. And then when I launched this product, the hitting vault that I've had now for about 9 years, it blew up because like I said, it was really the only online, it was masterclass before there was masterclass for hitting.
You're right.
And there was no one else in the market besides me. And I just was very fortunate of the timing of it. But yeah.
And then I guess like as you became a coach and realized, hey, I know technicality, I know the sport of things, and then there's the actual like human development side of things. Is that what kind of because you it like from afar, right? Like it feels like you're kind of like in the personal development space is
Yeah.
a little bit too. And so is that was kind of like what sent you down that rabbit hole and just started to feel that that's like a big I don't know missing puzzle piece in athletics and sports. Yeah, what kind of sent you down that?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, my entire journey of my life, I feel like personal development for myself is really, really important. I've read all the books and podcasts, and I love that realm. Like, I want to be the best person I can while I'm on this earth, and I think it's part of it's competitiveness in the sense of like, in not competitiveness against other people, but like I want to be the best version of myself, period. And
Right.
like, what is it? I want to know what it takes to do that. So while I went on my own personal journey, I realized, hey, this stuff could probably help the athletes I work with. And so I just tried to learn. I was started learning more and more about like, athletes and culture. And what I learned was that I kind of using some of the teams I early on was coaching, that when we really focused on the culture and we really focused on the personal development side of it, that the correlation to wins and losing seemed to also kind of do that. And so I'm like, okay. And I said, 2012 was I went to this convention. I met this guy named Bruce Brown who runs this thing called proactive coaching. And if any of the listeners are, into team culture stuff, I would tell you, like, right now, he's the biggest mentor in my life. He's changed my life. He showed me, like, how a real coach, deals with all these things and culture and develops it. And so I saw him speak and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like I kind of like that same moment I had in 2006 and 7 with Craig Wallenbrock is
Right.
With Bruce Brown. I'm like, oh my gosh, light bulb, like this is it. This is what I've been wanting to do as a coach. And so I bought like all of his stuff. Him and I became mentor. Kind of became my mentor, and I built a relationship over the years. And for me, I just learned, like I said, I really believe to this day that a great culture, a championship culture, correlates to wins. And so, selfishly, like I want to win and I'm competitive. So I think that's a piece of it. But I also think that, like, at the end of the day, I look back at my grandfather passed away a couple years ago, and I look back to his funeral and the athletes that showed up and spoke, and I'm like, not that I care about what the athletes say at my funeral, but at the same time, the things they said about him was about the man that he was,
Right.
and the relationships they had as adults and things like that. To me, I'm like, okay, this is what coaching is really about, and like relationship. And so for me, I realized, like, in his life, it fills my cup. It's life, giving to
Yeah.
me, those relationships. And same thing on my end, like some of my mentors and coaches that I had growing up, I still am in touch with, and I still call them coach. I mean, can't even
Yeah.
imagine
Yeah.
calling them by
Yeah.
their first name,
Right.
because
Right.
the relationships we had. And so I think for me, that all kinds of ties into my view on it and why I think it's so important and why it's important to me.
So when you first heard, I believe it was Bruce, correct, speak, is like, how
Yeah.
did you, okay, because I like, this is like, this is bread and butter, is because mentors absolutely like changed my life, right? Like, it's kind of like personal development 101. Don't, Tony Robbins, right? Don't reinvent the wheel. Just kind of like go find
Yeah.
somebody that's done it, and like proximity is power. Get as close as to that person as you can. And so how did you go about, did you already know them? Was it like you just at an event and saw them and just like, oh my God, like I got to get close to this individual? And was it just a cold email? Was it just a walk up behind, find them in the
Yeah.
lobby, like outside?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I showed up, I saw him speak. I had no idea who he was. So I'm like, look it up. And he had been an AD for a long time. He coached football and different, he coached different sports. And honestly, he kind of reminded me of my grandfather at the time and still does. And so I went to his booth and I was just like, man, that was awesome. Really appreciate it. What other products do you have and videos? And so I bought all the videos. I studied all the stuff different things he was teaching, just fell in love with his philosophy. And then, what I've learned about most coaches and in general is that, like, I think I just shot him a cold email like, hey, I've watched all your videos. I have some questions on this. And like, he always responded. And just over the years, more and more was just it gave me some time and was always available to me. And like, for people who are listening, the thing about mentors is, like, it doesn't have to be a famous person on stage. It doesn't have to be this thing, but like there's people that you have in your life, hopefully, that speak into your life, that, like, my first mentor was my high school football coach. And
Hmm.
for me, like it doesn't have to be this, person, this guru online, or someone that you see that's famous. But if you can find someone that like has some life experience, a little ahead of you in the game,
Yeah.
to bounce things off of, and to be able to share some things and ask questions about. I think that people are more available than you think. I try to be as available as I can when people reach out to me. It's difficult. I mean, with time and things like that. But I think for most part, most people, if you reach out to them and ask, and they'll try to give you what they can. I think everyone's trying to do their best to help each other.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's funny is in especially like if I could go back to my 18 to 20-year-old self, is like I would have made those moves er, faster early on. And so it's like try to getting to them. And because of social media and because of the ability to literally just drop in someone's DMs and
Yeah.
ask a question of like, hey, I read your book, blah, blah, blah. I can't tell you how many authors the same thing of like just a question, right? Like I'm not even like trying to be around them. It's like, hey, I read
Yeah.
this and I had a question on this. And 9 times out of 10, it's like they're really likely to respond. And so I do think it's like one of the other pieces I tell them is I actually got this. Have you seen the movie Catch Me If You Can?
Yeah.
Like,
Great
yeah,
movie.
okay. So it was when they interviewed like the real person that like played that, it was like, because at one point, like he went into like he was at a university, went in and started teaching, right? And they're like, how did you go in and teach? And his response was like, I always only had to read one chapter ahead and I'd be above like where everyone was. And so it's like, just find the person that's one chapter ahead, right? Like
Yep.
you're saying, you don't need the Kobe Bryant, the Tom Brady, like you don't
Yeah.
need that person yet. It's like, just find somebody that's a chapter ahead and then be
Mhm.
around them and start to pick their brains because that's only gonna like pull you up.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's great advice. And for me, what I've learned, what people, a lot of people haven't learned yet is, I mean, social media has changed the world. But like, if you look at let's, even some of the like, I'm not saying like famous gurus or like, but people, maybe some people that you follow that you admire, or you want to learn from. If you go to their posts, Twitter, Instagram, doesn't matter what it is. If a lot of times they have like one or two comments, or there's like
yeah,
the engagement. So like if you were to be consistently in those comments, like asking questions or good questions, I'm telling you right now, they would respond more often than you think. I think people are afraid to do that, but like like I've been fortunate. Like Gary V has been someone that I've had. He has taught me a lot. I've had some access to him. He's been incredible to me. I mean, another person that's changed my life is Gary V. But you
shout out
know,
Gary.
yeah, shout out to Gary. I mean, he's an awesome dude. Like I said, he's been awesome to me. But he's got hundreds of comments on things. But like the average person that you again would admire, that's a few chapters ahead of you, or having some success that you'd like to learn from, you know. Go through their Instagram posts and go through their Twitter, and you'll see like they might have 10 comments or less, which is very common. And like if you were just to engage with that thing or ask a question, over time you're going to start, it's just it's amazing the access you can have. And for me, a lot of the major league players that I've worked with over the last 10 years, I got a DM from, and I'm like looking up this person and like, hey, and they said, I've been following you for a long time. I really like your stuff. I want to work with you. And it's like, you never know,
Yeah.
if you're putting out good content, you never know who's watching, who's listening. I've been fortunate to have a lot of different celebrities follow me, and been able to reach out to people like people that I admire as a kid, Hall of Fame
Little
baseball players. I'm like,
fanboy moment from
I
time to
can't. I mean, I'm
time.
like looking at like, how is this person following me? I like I third grade. I wrote like a report on this guy. Like
Yeah.
I think about like Dave Winfield, one of the greatest players of all
Yeah.
time. And like third grade, I like wrote a book report, like report on like how much I admired him. And like now he follows me on Twitter, and like we've talking. It's like it's just that's the world we live in now. But all that to say, like if you're looking for some of that, it's there. You just got to kind of step in and, like I said, ask the question and engage with the content, and you never know what could happen.
So here's my question to follow up with that. 100% agree. Is I'm curious because like one of the like the major aspects that I feel like that I try to teach and like pour into again the 18 to 22-year-old like college athlete range is like how to ask questions. And I think a lot of times is they don't know is they see that and they comment like, oh my God, super cool. It's like they're not gonna you now you're just a fanboy fangirl. It's like you're not getting any closer to them. Or I can remember very vividly in our facility one day is asked, he was a middle school soccer player. And I was like, who's your soccer hero? Ronaldo. I was like, okay, if Ronaldo was training in here right now, like, what would you ask him? And he was just like, well, I'd ask him like how many goals he wants to score next season. And I'm like, bro, like, how does that help you out? Like, that doesn't help you out personally at all. It may be a cool fact to know. And so it's like, I'm curious if you kind of have the same experience in terms of like when you're working with, especially like at a university within college athletics, of even if they're asking you a question, it's like I see what you're trying to ask. Like you're not asking the right question. You're not going deep enough into like really understanding. You're
Yeah.
asking like the surface level style of it. Have your experience kind of been the same as well?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. Haven't really thought about it much. For me, when it comes to, if I had access to someone, it's what's funny is I look back. I mean, I think everybody does at some point. I look back at my own journey. It's like, man, 20 years ago, I was a high school coach. I had no followers. I knew nobody. I had no, relationships or resources. Like, and so like I'm just at a different place in my journey. And so if someone was ahead of me in my journey, or like I said, my son is a huge soccer fan. If I was, if I got to meet Ronaldo, my first question would be like, hey, my son's 12. At that age, like what are some things that you would teach him that at that time he should be focusing on, and like what would you? So to me, it's like, hey, this is where I'm at in my journey. What should I be focusing on, or what could I be learning at this time? And so to me, the questions I would ask is like, hey, you've been in my shoes.
Yeah,
Ronaldo was a 12-year-old boy at one point and was
right.
not famous. So like, besides just the pure talent that you have, like, what did you do? Practice 3 hours a day after school? Did you wake up early? Like, what are some things that you felt like were successes for you? And so I think for me, I try to approach it the same when I get questions from high school coaches, or I get a lot of questions from people like, I want to be a college coach. What advice do you have? And I'm like, oh well, I don't think you really want to be a college coach.
You
It
need a
sounds
bottle of
good, but
wine and half a day for
yeah,
that
okay.
one.
But I just think like again, like, asking people if you can approach it like most people have been at your place. And they're just like you said, a chapter ahead or 5 chapters ahead, whatever it is. Say, hey, when you were back at my chapter, what advice would you give that person? And so to me, that's how I would frame questions and asking. And it's like, hey, because they can look back to their experience and say, I would have done this differently. I would have done this better. And this is what I did to have success. And that's how I would approach it if I was looking to do that.
Yeah, I stole this. Do you know who Alex Hermosi is?
It sounds familiar, but as my wife would tell you, I'm awful with names.
He's kind of more, he's very in the business space is more of like his realm. But I say that because I stole this question directly from him. And so it's like anytime I get a chance to meet somebody like ahead of me is the question is what do I perceive to be true that isn't? Because the reason that you're ahead of me is probably some kind of belief that I have. And when you were at my level, you were at my age, you believe certain things. And so it's like, where do I need to shift my beliefs to be able to start leveling up? And so yeah, that's kind of like the one
That's really good.
yeah, that I've been kind of like living with and rolling with. And then the other one is I forget where I heard this one and I adopted this one is who do you know that I should know? And I think that,
Yes.
most people, again, if you get in those presents and like you build that relationship with them, it's like your mentor Bruce is all of a sudden it's like, okay, like well, yeah, like okay, like who do you like now? What's the next
Yes.
circle that I need to be in?
Yeah, that's a
Um,
great one. I think for me, it has been that case with like hitting. The world has changed with social media, and like now there's 5,000 hitting gurus
right,
on social
right.
media besides me. Back then there was two. Now there's 5,000, and so there's so many people doing incredible work that like there's guys out there who are grinding and producing great content. There's not really being seen, and so for me, I think in every field out there is. And so I think that question is, in 2024 is even more important than it was 10 years ago, because I think there are people like, hey, have you seen this guy's stuff? It's like, no, I don't know who that is. Let me see. And then, like I said, you go down there like, oh man, this guy's got great stuff. Yeah, totally agree with the idea of like, who should I know? And I think for me, that's kind of how, and I think people do a good job of that in the old days of like, what book should I be? Hey, give me your book recommendations, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so like, what book? And so I think the same thing should apply to people that you want to learn from. It's like, who should I be learning from? Tell me. And I think that's a great way to approach it.
Yeah. I think like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of cliche, but obviously like networking is everything, right? Like, and
Yes,
it's, I mean, even very much so. It's just like, if we want to call a spade, it's a piece of like why I use the podcast, right? Is it's
absolutely.
a piece that gives, I try to see it as like a win-win, right? It like gives you a platform to talk about like your things and what you have going on and your beliefs. And hopefully people can adopt, different beliefs based off of your stories. But at the same time is like, I've never actually met you, right? So it's like a chance to like
Yeah.
actually network of like, hey, like, yeah. So I
And,
love
I've
that.
talked to a lot of friends who have had podcasts who have said like just hosting the podcast alone has changed their career, just being in the sense of the people that they've met and the relationships they've built. And yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it's funny, what I thought about is in 2006, my last year as a high school coach, and I was 20 something years old. I went to the baseball convention, National Baseball Convention in Dallas. I knew nobody. I mean, like I said, I knew not a single person, but I knew some names. Like I bought some of these DVDs, and I went to this pitching forum, and there was probably 500 people in this room, and it lasted for a few hours. People kept dwindling away, and I kept, I want to listen, and Fred Corral, who I actually worked with at Missouri, and Alan Jaeger, who's actually a good friend of mine now. Like these are guys I looked up to, bought their DVDs. Next thing you know, there's like 12 people in the room, and they're still sharing ideas, and I'm sitting there, a fly on the wall, just like listening. I don't even know if I had said anything in 5 hours, but like they gave access. And I don't think at that moment is when I built a relationship with them, like, but like I have one of the incredible things about like these get-togethers and national conventions, or like the things that any type of get-together you have in your industry, it's amazing the access that you can get by just being present and just listening and sticking around. And for me, like, I look back, that was 18 years ago. I can still picture that night perfectly, because I remember thinking, man, I'm looking around this table, like these guys are, I bought their DVDs. I've looked up to them. I know, and I'm at the table with them.
Yeah.
And so, I just think that people in general, like you kind of touched on it a few times, is that like, if you want access to learning and these things, like they are available, you've just got to look for them.
And I think too is to tie from the social media to what you just said, as far as like sitting in that room and then uh friends that have done podcasts. I think the underlining like commonality there was is like consistency, right? Like you
Mm,
consistently show up having comments and asking questions, on that person's social media. You stayed 5 hours into that convention where most people were like, all right, I think I got what I need, right? Two,
yeah.
3, 4 hours in. And I think with podcasts, I think the statistic is if you've done over 20 episodes on a podcast, you're in the 1%, right? And the
Yeah.
idea
Doesn't
here
surprise me.
is most people can't stick with something. They get this great idea. They got 5, 10 people lined up, and then they're like, all right, like I don't know who else to like reach out to. And it becomes a burden and a struggle. And so it gets washed away. And so I think that's where a lot of people's struggles now is
Mm,
like, dude, like you gotta keep showing up. Even,
yeah.
it's a volume thing, right? It's
Yeah.
hitting, right? Like, I mean,
Yep.
the old cliche of like you hit 330% and you're a Hall of Famer, right? And it's like you
Yeah.
just got to keep showing up and putting volume and numbers in.
Yep. So I got to give a shout out to a buddy of mine named CJ Beatty, who again I met at a convention. I had no idea who he was. He's got some actually really cool baseball rap songs on YouTube, but he's a motivational speaker guy who's really built his thing out. Like it's incredible. I talking to him one day, and he's like, "Man, I posted videos on YouTube for a year, and like never got more than 20 views, and 19 of them were for my mom." But then I had one motivational talk on YouTube that went viral, like 7 million views, and I get changed. It opened. Like next thing you know, more subscribers, and now that I met him like 5, 6 years ago. And now, like, I mean, he's one of the leading motivational guys in baseball and softball and speaking. And like, he literally, he's like, Matt, my secret was just not giving up,
Yeah.
literally just showing up, being consistent, not giving up. Even when I think my mom was the only one watching my YouTube videos. And, now he's had a lot of success and had a great career. And like, to me, just he's a testament. And so many others out there, like is like the testament to just showing up, being consistent, just not giving up. And like, next thing you know, you're having success and you've outlasted 99% of the people just by showing up.
And I think too, especially from like a video content podcast perspective, is somebody once told me early on is like I wanted everything to be so perfect. And they were like,
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, no one's going to be listening at the end. So it doesn't matter. And you don't want them to because it's not going to be perfect and it's okay. But like you'll find your voice, you'll get a hang of it, you'll show up, you'll know what questions to ask. The interactions will get better and smoother over time. It's like, but you just gotta keep doing it.
Amen to that.
So, all right, cool. Last question. So, if you were in a stadium of 100,000 people and you could only leave them with one message, what would it be?
The one message I would be is that to make sure to communicate to your children that your love is not predicated on their performance and results.
Mm,
In my 23 years of being a dad, 27 years of being a dad, 23 years of being a coach, I have come across so many athletes who have great connections with their parents or connect with their parents over sports. And they have those things that they've stopped playing or they've ended their careers because like dad was too hard on me or mom made it unenjoyable, these things. And I think I just come across so many athletes who like think that their parents love them based on how many points they score in a game or how many goals they score in soccer. And I think parents, I don't think we do a good enough job of saying, hey, I just love to watch you play, because when you're 18, 19, 20 and you're out of the house, I'm going to really, really miss this. And I think parents are it's just the message of that just goes over their head, and they're so wrapped up in their kids' performance, and they don't realize. So for me, like I said, the message I would leave is that, hey, parents, communicate very clearly that you love your kids, that you love watching them, no matter if they score 0 points or they score 50 points. It doesn't matter to you, that you just love watching them and getting to experience the time of watching them play, because it goes by so, so fast. And you want them to play as long as you possibly can for reasons for them and for you as well.
yeah, I love it. I love it too. And I think is the one thing like piggyback off that too is parents not comparing their kids to like other peers. I think it's
Yep.
just like just let your kid be your kid. Like it'll be what it is literally actually a conversation last night with my wife. We got a little 1.5 year old, or a little over 1.5, and she basically grows up in a gymnastics gym. And some other parents were like comparing their kids that are like 3. I'm like, how old is she? Oh my God, she can do this. I was like, guys, your child is 3. You don't even know their potential. It's
Yes.
okay.
Yes, it's okay. Yeah, comparison is the thief of joy, and 100% when it comes to kids. And the funny thing about it is that kids grow. I mean, my uncle played for Chicago White Sox. He was 6 foot at 12 years old, and like one of the best 12-year-olds in the country, because he was 6 feet at 12 years old. My son's like 4'6" at 12 years old. Like, so it's just like, yeah, everybody grows differently and is differently, and everyone's journey is different. And like, you absolutely cannot be comparing your kids to anybody else's kid. Like, your kid is your kid, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's who they are.
I love it, man. I love it. Well, I appreciate all the insights, all the stories. And that's kind of a big reason, like I started the podcast too, is I just believe stories are what move people, and everyone gets sick and tired of Ryan's stories. So it's like let's hear everyone else's story, and hopefully like people can just relate to it. It's like, oh my God, like yeah. And so like it can shift some of their beliefs, and ultimately like in whatever, if it's parenting, sports, athletics, fatherhood, motherhood, whatever it is, to accomplish the things that they want to accomplish. So I appreciate you, man, and like, yeah, go Beavs.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. Go Beavs.
All right. Until next time, everybody. Peace.